All right, so digestive system. Digestive system is certainly a bit of a more complex system. If we're coming off a respiratory system or something like that, where it's fairly compact, only has a few organs that contribute to the overall function of the system, etc., digestive system kind of goes the other end of the spectrum. Lots of different organs, each one with a role to play that we need to learn, and not only occurring at the organ level, but we also get down to, again, the cellular and the molecular level to understand how this system contributes to homeostasis in the body. So that's what we see from the onset, is that you certainly need to know the different structures involved that contribute to the digestive system. And what we find is that when we get into it, we find that there are two pathways here, right? Or two, if you will, sets of organs. There are those organs that are part of the alimentary canal, right? So as food gets swallowed, hopefully not the way that I'm tracing necessarily, but staying within the tract, it's going to pass into all of these sections of a tube that's called the alimentary canal. Okay? And so that's the main street of the digestive system. And so we're going to be moving it through almost like an assembly line, but this is a disassembly line where we are taking apart these large things that we've ingested, and we are bit by bit, physically and chemically, taking it apart into smaller and smaller components so that ultimately we have these small building blocks of nutrients that we can absorb into the blood, distribute to the cells, and give those building blocks to the cells so that they can synthesize what they need or complete their different life-sustaining processes. So alimentary canal and organs making it up are important. This open tube that starts at the mouth and ends up at the anus. But there are also these accessory organs along the way where the food doesn't enter into these, but oftentimes they produce a secretion or that adds to the digestive process, or they add to the digestive process in some way. So for instance, there are the teeth, there are the salivary glands, the tongue, there's also going to be the liver, like we see there. There's going to be the pancreas. There's going to be the gallbladder that's hanging underneath the liver. All of those are accessory organs that contribute to the digestive system in some way. So like we said, gastrointestinal tract of the alimentary canal is Main Street. Then we have the accessory structures. So for each of those, you need to know how they contribute to digestion. Is it physical digestion? Is it chemical digestion? Is it just moving it through this disassembly line that we call the gastrointestinal tract? How do they contribute? So knowing the different digestive processes that are occurring as well is going to be important. So ingestion, propulsion, moving it through this disassembly line, two different types of digestion, both mechanical, like chewing things up, and chemical. Chemical will be a bit more detail oriented because we need to learn the chemicals, if you will, that aid in this breakdown process, in this decomposition. And what we're talking about there is mainly enzymes. We need to know where those enzymes come from. We need to know what their substrates are, what are they specifically aiding in the digestion, and then what are the products that we get afterwards, the small building blocks that we get afterwards. Absorption is going to be important too, because after all this process of breaking things down, we've got to get it across the body wall to deliver it to the cells of the body that need it. And then defecation is getting rid of anything that is not useful to the body. Now I'd say there's one other function as well that's not listed here that's also important, and that is secretion. And so with secretion, we're going to find that secretion occurs all along this path because this opens to the outside. It's an organ that opens to the outside, so we know that it's going to be mucus lined. So there's going to be the secretion of mucus, but there's also going to be the secretion of, for instance, hydrochloric acid and saliva and pancreatic juice and bile, etc., etc. So that's going to be important too. So knowing these different processes, where they occur, is going to be an important topic here too. Alright, now we do get down to a little bit of the tissue level when we look at this GI tract and we look at the layers. Now this is mostly what we consider lab material. So the fact that we have a mucosa that we see here, a submucosa, a muscularis layer, and then a serosa that's on the very outside. and kind of what makes up those different layers. But it is giving us a foundation, again, for how this gastrointestinal tract is laid out and how it does its particular job. Another important topic, the main topic is going to be knowing those organs and how they contribute to the digestive process. But we always, when we get to these systems, we always want to know how they integrate with the work of other systems and how our managerial systems coordinate that. So it's going to be brain and spinal cord in terms of central nervous system and the nerves that go out and come back to it. But then also the endocrine system, our wireless system with its hormones. How does it come into play? What we'll also find with these systems is that there's a third level of control that's kind of a localized control, an intrinsic control. And we'll see that here, we'll see it with the urinary system, etc. And so you do need to know and be able to describe how this system is told when to increase its activity or decrease its activity or coordinate its activity. How does that exactly work? So neural innervation is going to have to do with, again, kind of extrinsic and intrinsic control. The intrinsic control here, the localized control, is called the enteric nervous system. It coordinates with the autonomic nervous system as well and the central nervous system, but when we look at it, its main role is going to be to coordinate things at a lower level itself. So some feedback here, but we can see that it is working to control both the physical activity as well as secretions coming from the mucosa and things like that. So there's a submucosal plexus of it, a myenteric plexus. This one handles the muscle part, and it coordinates the activity between different organs, like from the intestine back to the stomach, etc. That type of communication. Autonomic is extrinsic neural control, so knowing how we can increase or decrease the activity here. In an interesting turn of events, it's parasympathetic stimulation here that really gets this system going, right? Rest and digest, parasympathetic is going to increase the activity of this system, whereas sympathetic is going to decrease it. That's something that we've seen kind of as a reversal from other systems. All right, and then we get a little bit in terms of where we find it, what are the membranes involved, etc. Then the rest of the chapter is following the food down this GI tract and then talking about those different organs along the way. So again, not only the anatomy, but talking about how each of these contribute to digestive function. You can see our salivary glands, talk about how they produce different types of saliva based on if you're eating or not, and based on the secretions that they get, the secretions they put out based on the stimulations that they get. And one thing to notice is we said that in the digestive process there will be things like physical digestion like chewing, but also chemical digestion by enzymes. So we want to pay attention where these enzymes are coming from and what they work to digest. And we see our first one coming in here in the form of what's called salivary amylase. Okay, so more accessory structures with the mouth, including different types of teeth, etc. Most of that's lab type material. And then we move our way down. We start talking about the digestion that goes on there. We start with the anatomy, the different parts. Then we talk about the physiology. What type of digestion is occurring there? Mechanical, chemical, etc. Then we move to the tube that routes this down to the stomach. So not a lot of digestion occurring there as we go through the pharynx and the esophagus. But when we get to the stomach, after we learn the different regions and layers and things like that, we talk about how it contributes to digestive function. So this is where our protein digestion begins instead, where we have an activated enzyme that's called pepsin that's secreted in the stomach and works well at a very low pH to help digest proteins. In terms of fat digestion, there is some examples of fat digestion in terms of lipase, right? This is milk fats. And remember, anywhere you see the ASE, that helps us to recognize that that's an enzyme, although not all enzymes have that. And then we continue kind of our movement there. So we talk about the different cells that are secreting and mixing things with the food. We can see that activated pepsin here, that's working to cleave proteins into smaller peptide fragments. and it needs the presence of hydrochloric acid to become activated. Then we are working our way from the stomach down to the small intestine, and here we get a lot of secretions from the accessory organs: liver, gallbladder, pancreas. What are they secreting? How does it help us in the digestive process? Pancreas is pretty complex. It's both endocrine and exocrine in function. We're going to focus on exocrine, what it secretes into ducts and dumps into the small intestine, and that's most of the organ anyway. And basically the pancreas has a whole menu of different enzymes that help us to digest all the different food molecules that we're taking in. Additionally, it puts out sodium bicarbonate to help neutralize the acidic chyme that's coming down from the stomach with all that hydrochloric acid. So again, we have protein enzymes, we've got carbohydrate or starch enzymes, as well as lipid or fat enzymes. We even have some that digest nucleic acids as well. So pancreas does quite a lot. Liver also does a lot, but in terms of primary digestion of food, it produces a substance that's called bile that helps us to digest fats or lipids. The gallbladder stores that bile, doesn't actually create it, but it stores the bile so that when food comes into the small intestine, we can get bile coming from the gallbladder, we can get some fresh bile that's been synthesized by the liver, and that's going to help us to digest fats. Okay, now we talked about neural control of the system, both autonomic and enteric. We didn't get to, or we needed to finish up, the hormonal control, the endocrine system control. And these are three, that's not the only ones, but three major hormones that work to control or coordinate the digestive system activity. Gastrin, mainly regulating the stomach, secretin, and CCK. These ones here are communicating between some of these last digestive organs, like between the small intestine and even the liver, and again that pancreas, and back to the stomach, etc. So it helps to coordinate the activities so that we know when we get an arrival of food in the small intestine, we need all these accessory organs to do their job and help us out to digest it. Okay, so we get into the small intestine, the three different parts. We talk about the surface area inside and how it has all these adaptations for having lots of surface area, which is important because this is where the food digestion is going to complete and absorption. So we talk about circular folds that are in there, the villi, the finger-like villi that stick out, as well as microvilli that are on the apical surface of the columnar epithelium lining the inside of this organ. Now, if you get into large intestine we'll find is basically like a drying rack. So almost all of the digestion, chemical digestion, mechanical digestion, etc., has occurred prior to the large intestine, right? So mainly in that small intestine. So there are some reviews that I have in here for what happens in terms of these carbohydrates. What do we start out with in terms of a macromolecule? What do we end up with in terms of a product, a smaller building block? And I go over the different areas where carbohydrates or starches might be digested and how they are digested in terms of the enzymes involved. So we do that for carbohydrates, we do that for proteins, we do that for lipids as well. And we see this is a key word, emulsification. This is what that bile is doing to help break up those fat globules. And even the digestion of nucleic acids. So for all of your cells, when you make new cells and then they have a nucleus with all those nucleotides making up that double-stranded DNA, where do you think those nucleotides come from when cells divide, etc.? We get them from our food. We got to break down the DNA and the RNA molecules into those individual building blocks that we call nucleotides. So there are enzymes for that as well. And then towards the end of this, not only are we talking about the enzymes that work on the particular food items or food molecules, etc., but how are these different digestive products being brought across the body wall? We can see some of those villi here on the cells of the small intestine, and you can see a variety of different ways that these substances are transported into the cells lining the intestine, as well as out of it going into the surrounding capillaries. Okay, so like I said, when we get to the very last section of the GI tract, we get to the large intestine, which is really just there to help us pick up any extra fluids, electrolytes, or salts. These are things that occur in the small intestine, but finish up, like I said, in the large intestine. Talking about different chemical classes of vitamins and how it makes it easier or harder for them to be digested and absorbed. Talking about water as well. Most people focus on food, but certainly water that we ingest is going to be very important, that not only do we ingest it, but we absorb it and where that's happening. There's our drying rack. It's kind of simplified role when we look at it before getting to the end of it, like the sigmoid colon here, where it straightens out. And these are, like I said, largely undigestible material. And we do have bacteria in there, and the bacteria can aid in breaking down some things that we can't, like plant starches, etc., as well as different types of proteins. So they have a role to play in there as well. But definitely as you're going through this, pay attention to the tables and the figures in your textbook, whichever textbook it is, because those are where we really summarize the important points about the digestive system, the important organs, about what they do, etc. The last topic that we get into in terms of digestive system, again, has to do with the coordination of its activity, and talking about how we get in these feedback loops in order to increase or decrease its activity to match the amount of food that's coming in and needs to be processed. And that separates into three phases. One associated with the head, thinking and smelling food, etc. Gastric, in terms of the stomach and it being full or empty, etc. And then the intestine. And we'll have communication between all of these different sections. So that's really our highlighted list of structures and functions of the digestive system itself.